Hi, good morning. I am continuing the findWHERE.info recording for the topic of landlord. Let me begin. Good morning. findWHERE series. This topic is landlord, property investing and selling issues. I'm Thomasin PA 2066. Today is 16th of August 2021. Okay, landlord is a name that usually we refer to a tenancy when unit for a tenant to occupy. So landlord is in fact refers to whoever who lend out the unit. Not necessarily a landlord has to be the owner So in this case, just to be clear on this, let me go in. So we have gone through the first block, the shelter, which in fact quite a lengthy one. Basic dealings, vendor, buyer, developer, lawyer, and also with the introduction. After that, we went to K with agent and banker. So this part, the agent part and the banker part, I think very much related to our work as in estate agency. Then I have also done a small one on valuer and property manager. Now we move to landlord on the left side. So this part is about investment. It's about investment where we talk about tenant eventually and portfolio and as well as government policy. Before we go to the last block, which is on business, we talk about a little bit on foreigner. After that, we will move to all the business aspect of real estate. Let me go in. So objective of this chapter on landlord is to highlight that the rental income, because when you are a landlord, you want to ensure your rental income as a source of your investment return. So this is a yield, they call it YIELD, the yield, rental yield. So of course, meaning to say you spend money to maintain your rental unit, and then the rental unit earn income and an income for you. So it includes outgoings like assessment bill, maintenance costs, your, in fact, some even doing cleaning for the tenant. So good location and stable rental income would be able to help you with your repayment. Of course, a lot of time people will say, well, it makes money if it's a good investment. But again, there are investment risks. In any sort of investment, there will be rental risk, tenant not paying. So this main part of my chapter today is about some of the legal as well as some of the things that you have to face when you have a tenant problem issue. So deductibles indeed for landlord is important. So you have to think about how you manage the income so that you can best benefit from the investment. So this means that you have to manage your expenditure, and hopefully this expenditure can give you good tenant, and a good tenant make payment of your rental so that you make a good income from your investment. So cost of maintenance and outgoing which can be deducted from the income of the rental. So this part for long-term thinking, if you are not just owning one unit, that means you are looking at passive income from a number of your investment, then as in management of the investments, so we call it a portfolio management. You are going to save on your income, expenditure on your outgoings, so that you get the best of both sides. So this means that not necessarily you must always collect rental and not spending money, because at the end the house needs maintenance. Eventually, if you rented it out, it will be the repair and replacement or whatever maintenance. But before you get it rented, in fact, this means that you need to find your tenant. So if you can do it yourself, then no need to pay for agent's commission. But you employ an agent or give the job to an agent, then you need to pay him commission, and this commission are the cost of trying to get a tenant for you. So market demands as in down time, and now when the market is very bad, Similarly, as in sales and purchase, you don't get a lot of purchaser coming forward. You also don't get a lot of tenant looking for renting housing. Similarly, in commercial, when now with the COVID situation, most of the investment in the commercial property cannot get tenant. So you see a lot of shops all close up. The whole place is deserted. Nobody go there. You see all the banner and flyers flying around with agents' telephone number, and nobody is able to make a business viable in that area because nobody go there. It's COVID time. So therefore, there are risks in having a rental property, and in fact, in higher risk if you have a commercial rental property. And some of the time, the costs incurred can be due to the demand from the tenant. So some tenants may want higher comfort of living and ask to replace some of the things inside the house. So all this becomes a higher cost meeting up the demand of this tenant. And to mention this, I have put here must be after first tenant. So all these costs and expenditure is considered a deductible expenditure because the unit has been renting out. So, but if you have just recently acquired a new unit for rent, let's say you just bought a place or you just move out of your own place, and this place has not been rented before. So the first instance when you do up the place for rental, this income of a renter is after you have invested in the initial stage. That means if it's an empty house, and then before you look for your tenant, you are putting it up nicely, thinking of getting it as your wedding home. That means you want to move in, have a nice home to get married. So you put up all the nice furniture, nice renovation, turn it as a wedding home. But then eventually you job movement or whatever reason that you are not going to stay in this place anymore. Then this place is supposed to be your early on plan as a wedding home. Now no more as a wedding home, so I would rent it out. So all the cost of investing into a unit for its purpose earlier on cannot be used as a deductible expense for the subsequent tenant purpose. So if you can rent it out at a higher rental, that means maybe I put it in a way that this is not an empty unit anymore. This is a well decorated, well furnished unit, so you could rent it out at double the rental. So when it is such a case, this double rental is based on the capital investment that you have put in for that unit. So instead of renting it at half the rental price, your capital investment could give you a higher rental of 2,000 instead of 1,000. Let's say empty unit 1,000, furnished unit 2,000. So the furnished unit 2,000 from the first tenant, you cannot deduct the investment, the capital investment, because it has already used the rental that you wanted. So that rental that you wanted is based on the improved condition, the capital investment that you have put in. So subsequently, let's say after the first tenant moved away, then when it became empty again and you went into the house and there was some repair needed. So all this repair needed is to maintain the scenario the same. That means going back to the actual usable scenario or usable condition. So this type of repair and replacement, let's say there is a chair that was broken, so you have to replace the chair. So this replacement cost is actually restore back the unit to its original condition to enjoy again the 2,000 rental that is supposed to be your targeted rental for the next tenant. So this type of expenses to resume or to return back to the original state, these are considered repair, maintenance costs, and these are all deductible from the future rental rate. So when your rental 2,000, you take the 2,000, you actually bought the chair, so you can deduct out the 2,000, the chair cost, so that you say that, well, in order to gain back my rental, I actually use this money to gain back. So this is deductible. But in the initial stage, when you make it as a wedding house, and then you decided not to stay because you had a good job placement elsewhere, you could not stay in the place. Those are capital investment. Those are not allowed for deduction because it had nothing to do with the rental. In fact, it was just your initial thinking of a business investment, that maybe you want to use it as a wedding home and eventually enjoy the wedding home comfort. So this comfort, all these were able to gain your ability to rent it out at double the rental. So the double rental was the result of your capital investment, not because you have to replace, repair, or certain damage that you got to resume back. So those are things that is in the Income Tax Act. So that part I just touch on now. So whatever expenses that is expense to earn the income, it can be deductible under the Income Tax Act. So management charges and assessment fee, because you have to continually ensure that the same comfort is given after years of or even months of renting out. You just want to maintain the original state, then you have to pay the management bill, management charges, assessment fee, local council, so that this unit is keep on renting out. So all these costs, continuing costs, can be deducted from the rental income. So your rental income will be reduced, and therefore the income tax paid for the rental income will be minimized. Type of rental property, we have generally a few types of common rental property. Of course, residential, because residential means shelter, roof for the user, the tenant. So that means bigger segment of the market. Of course, commercial, as I said just now, for business. And now with the condition like this, pandemic, a lot of business are on the closure, so they are not able, or even they have to stop the commercial rental. Industrial is mainly for expansion or export or manufacturing. Agricultural rental is like leasing of the land. So when they lease the land for a long time for production of crops, these are rental in the commercial, industrial, and agriculture sectors. So investment barriers for you to think about as a landlord, you may think of those barriers for you to go into rental market to earn a rental income, which is section 4D of the Income Tax Act. So this they have a high entry barrier because not everyone has saving that you can go and buy a property and start renting it out. So not many has got this type of capacity to do rental market. So unless you are quite wealthy of your own and you have saved enough money, or you are over the years accumulated a number of property, normally we only buy a house to sell. In big cities, not even able to buy because it's too expensive. So most of the time we are tenant, not landlord. The other part is that the loan margin, because the loan to value. Now, if you have the first house which is 90% and the second house 90%, likely you can buy two houses with 90% loan, and one is like, look, for example, if you have enough capital, you have a good salary, then you buy two houses with 90% loan. At the same time, you only stay in one house where the other one is given for rental. So this is the likely condition. But let's say you are only able to get 90% in the first house, and then you can't get loan in the second house, then maybe your margin will be much less, maybe 70% or 60%. You need to have very high amount of saving, cash payment for the property. So for that, you probably won't do it because your cash enough for your living may not be enough to pump into buying another property. So loan margin may affect the ability of landlord to continue buying property. Cash down payment, as I said, if you buy property with 10% down payment, maybe it is okay. But then if you cannot get a loan margin, you have to pay 30% down payment for a property that is 500,000. That is a lot of money, 150,000. So there's likely that people won't do that type of investment. risk of no tenant. Again, risk of no tenant very obvious now. A lot of time the tenants came from urbanization. So if in the case of condition like pandemic, then people are not getting job, people don't have a place to work, then they will go back to their hometown. So instead of staying in a rented place, they go back to their own house in their own kampong, right? So there is no tenant. So higher interest rate for loan on commercial and other properties also makes the commercial properties riskier as a investment for rent, because you cannot get very much lower like housing loan, because housing loan is special control by government. Therefore, the housing loan percentage of interest rate is about the lowest in the market. So if you were to get other types of loan to buy a property, definitely you cannot enjoy this type of loan interest. So being unable to enjoy this type of loan interest, then your rental income may not cover your interest of the servicing the loan. So in a way, it becomes a limitation for you to actually invest in commercial property. For investment barrier for commercial property, likely high barrier. Not many people can buy expensive millions of commercial in millions ringgit, and then high interest rate for loan. At the same time, may not get a good tenant. So some of these commercial tenants also, you need to give them attractive incentive for them to come in. Sometimes it's 3 months no rental, and also some is even 6 months no rental. If it is an anchor tenant, a big supermarket chain. So this type of big scale commercial complex for tenancy, you likely has to be a corporation. You are a big company as well. You may be you are maybe a developer company already. You build this building, and then your sister company or your subsidiary company come and manage this big building, big complex. So in such a context, the likelihood is that you would employ professional. Likely you get a property manager to maintain that whole building. So the part is complex. Tenancy management is even more complicated. There will be legal requirement for certain, maybe a bomba requirement, all these building drainage and all the bylaw requirements. Next, we talk about residential rental income, because these are the common ones, because we are mostly owning a first house for ourselves, and then we upgrade, then we have the second house, while the first one we rent it out and getting prepared for the future use by our children. So this is the most common scenario that people end up as a landlord. Easy manage a smaller unit, cheaper cost of maintenance because you have stayed there, you know how to maintain it. Low risk of tenant default because these are all for home use. That means you have maybe some students coming at that area to attend college, so they just need a place to stay, and these are students that they are here to study. They won't buy yet, as their parents may not be thinking of their kids to buy a home at a city, while they expect the children to go back to their hometown. So there is a lot of this type of scenario. People, urbanization coming to bigger city, they need a place to stay, and they sometimes have to rent for a few years before they save enough money to buy their own place. So this is the biggest rental market, and some of the successes of investors in real estate actually rent home unit. That means the first house they stay, and then eventually become a big scale landlord. That means they start accumulating residential rental property, and then eventually over time they can have actually more than 5 or 10 units of these rental houses, all are for per rental rate. 2 or 3% putting up about 1,005 ringgit to 1,008. So commercial rental is higher risk, huge amount investment. Of course, bigger units, sometimes even factories, and commercial means malls, shopping malls. Then, as I said, risk of facing downturn. A lot of time, the commercial rental problem is the tenants, when they are not doing well in business, they stop paying. renting to KFC, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, and all this, to just say about these types of fast food chain. This type of fast food chain, some of them they actually buy the property themselves. Like McDonald's, they will build. In fact, the drive-through is all their investment. So all these companies, they also not stupid. So they have enough money. They would want to build and for their long-term development. High demand area for real estate is always good for investing. But then the high barrier also, because it's so expensive. So if you are thinking about commercial rental, likely you have to be very strong in your cash flow. So some of these things are going into millions, and then at the end may not actually get a tenant. Industrial and agriculture is even more specialized. So unless you are like specialized in industrial or agriculture, you wouldn't usually go into this type of huge scale investment, because the land for long lease like 20-30 years, you need to really have enough to sustain over the number of years, especially plantation and also crops that may go into difficulties due to the global economic condition, the commodity pricing and all this. So all these are not for lay people, not for laymen on the street. Industry also not for laymen on the street, because it takes a lot of years of experience in that industry to understand whether that industry has the potential to sustain the business for payment of this rental. Common issues of a landlord for residential landlord is like looking for the right tenant, because you don't have a good feeling of whether this tenant is able to pay you the rental or not. Use of agency have good tenants because they are involved with the companies, because they are companies that, like big companies in KL or in Selangor, they have the human resource department, and then the human resource department tend to look for housing for their staff. So when they have staff transfer from smaller branches or outskirts, then when the new staff comes in, they would need housing for their staff. So when you have a good time with this company HR department, sometimes you understand that their staff are quite well paid, and therefore you can get a good feeling of this being your tenant. So they are at least high skilled or well paid managerial position. So therefore the tenancy signing with this higher bracket of income can ensure your income of a renter better than renting to somebody you don't understand the background. Usually you can do also for rent by owner. So you yourself as one owner going around looking for tenant. So the risk can be minimized because you don't do an agent. So sometimes the agent, in order to close the deal, close the tenancy deal, you would cite the tenant saying that the tenant is so good, but then at the end, how do you know whether the tenant will be good or not when you just see him for a few days? Of course you wouldn't be able to tell. So some of these agents, due to cari makan, so you can't blame them also, because they also will not understand the tenant, as the tenant called them prospecting for house. So some of these issues can happen, like using it as a gambling spot, using it as for online gambling, and then this online gambling things has happened recently, that the police raid the unit and the landlord get into trouble also. And the problem is that sometimes the landlord not necessarily becomes the owner, because especially when the owner is not in town, the landlord actually give it to their relative or even give it to the agent, and the agent rent it out. So actually the landlord is overseas, so the part of the arrangement are all done through the local representative. So this local person may be busy or not so concerned about something which he doesn't own, and he doesn't get paid as well, probably not paid as well for whatever intermediary role he is in. Who offers, I would say maybe this is something which confuse public also. Who offers to rent? Because when we are talking about who offers, because the person who accept and the person who offers differs in terms of payment of the stamp duty. So this part is one thing I want to highlight. In contract law, when there is offer, acceptance and consideration, it forms a contract. So it forms an agreement. According to Stamps Act, it is actually the person who offers initiating the contract. The interpretation sometimes can be confusing. Our interpretation in the market is the person who accepts is the lessor. The person who offers is a lessee. Landlord invite public in an advertisement, so that part, social media or in an advertisement, it's actually an invitation to treat. It's not an offer. So prospect tenant come forward and check the house, find that this is a good place, or they are so-called satisfied with the property, then they actually offer to rent. So the offer to rent to the landlord becomes the lessor. So the person who lease out becomes a lessor. Then the tenant being the offerer and accept the lease becomes the lessee. The landlord accepts the offer from the tenant. Landlord accepts the offer, the money paid consideration, then it becomes a tenancy contract. So this means that the Stamp Duty Act 1949, lessee, in this case the tenant, is to pay for the stamp duty. So this is in a way confusing, because some people will say it is the offerer or the landlord who offers to rent out his unit, so he is supposed to pay for the stamp duty. So these are confusion, and just to make it clear, in the Act, key points is that the Act, the person who offers, who is a tenant, actually become the lessee, and it is the lessee in the Act says to pay for the stamp duty. Later we go to tenant. In the tenant chapter, I will show you the Act, the law that controls this part of the payment. Key points to landlord. Anyway, landlord's interest is to have a rental payment on time, deposit to do the booking. If you don't do the deposit, he can rent it to another person. Security deposit for damages, because he has to keep security if he is looking at in case damages done to the house, he can repair using the security deposit. Similarly, the utility deposit for the utility bills. So wear and tear to be made good by tenant is very hard to, both party has to agree, very hard for both party to agree, because some of the wear and tear cannot be proven from the concept of wear and tear should be to the landlord, because wear and tear is not something which tenant can control. Let's say, for example, when the house was rented to one tenant, the previous tenant used the aircon for 1 year. Now the next tenant moved in, he uses the same aircon for 2 months and the aircon failed. So this aircon fail, definitely the contributing factor of wear and tear was due to the previous tenant, not to the current tenant. So in such a scenario, the current tenant may not be happy to repair for a reason that he was just there for 2 months, and then the wear and tear of the aircon was in fact that back to the earlier days where it was overused by the previous tenant. So usually wear and tear to be made good by tenant has to be understood in a scenario of mutual agreed terms. So for example, any wear and tear on the electronic appliances should be starting only after 3 months or 6 months of use. That means in the initial 3 months, in the previous case just now, it fell in the second month. The landlord has to make good. The landlord has to make good the aircon, because the landlord supposed to cover the wear and tear of the items, because it is supposed to be provided with the comfort of living for the tenant.